So, hello everyone. My name's Mike Yallits. I'm a solutions architect for Alto Networks. I'm coming out here to talk a little bit about our view of the Canadian threat landscape. So, first slide, legal. Now, I realize this is going online, so I got to be very specific on what I talk about, and I kind of wish I wouldn't have put this slide in here now. But legal team came down on me pretty hard. They wanted to make sure that everyone realizes here that, first off, I am not a threat researcher. Okay, by trade, this is not my job. We have teams that do that. What I've done, though, is I've taken all the data that we see from Palo Alto Networks and really kind of sliced and diced it on a Canadian threat landscape. So really looking at the campaigns that we see in Canada, the actors that are hitting Canada, and we're going to talk a little bit about how Canada differs from the world, right? We have very specific threats that we see. We have very specific transport mechanisms that we see in Canada. So we're going to go through some of that. Again, some of this is interpretation on myself because, again, I'm not a threat researcher. So in one of the examples I'm going to show, there was 7,200 samples. I did not go through all of them. That is a lot of effort, a long time. So what I did in that case was I grouped them together. Anything that looks similar, I treat it as one sample, okay? Also, this information comes from the Global Threat Alliance and specifically our wildfire service that Palo Alto Network has. So we don't see everything that happens in Canada, right? That is not what we're looking at. What we're looking at here is a combination of about 5 million endpoints and 125,000 firewall devices that are all kind of combining data for worldwide, visibility into what we're seeing. So what I've done here is specifically looked at data from January 1st of this year up until September 30th. Now, I did this presentation a couple of weeks ago. That's why the time frame is basically a month old. Also, it took me a couple of weeks to get through all this stuff, so I didn't want to try to do November 1st and come out here because I wouldn't be very up to date. I was pretty surprised Theo had done the research on a paper that came out a week and a half ago. That's pretty ballsy to get up here and do a presentation on something that's that new. So again, like I said, most of the data in this presentation, our source was from the wildfire service that Palo Alto Networks offers, as well as VirusTotal. So we've actually correlated some of the data with VirusTotal to go a little bit deeper into, sorry, she's just taking pictures. So go a little bit deeper into some of the, especially the threats and the campaigns that we were seeing, because not all the information that was provided from our Unit 42 group was very in-depth. Also, we're looking at first seen, okay? So this is a very, very specific way of looking at data. So we might have seen a new exploit, a new file, a new type of malware hit once, okay? Once we've seen it, that's a checkbox for us. We don't bother continuing to look for it, okay? Because we've seen it, the industry is already protected against it. So there are cases here where we've seen a file hit once. I've treated that as a checkbox, but it might have been 1 million times over the next 3 weeks. So when we're specifically looking at targeted attacks, the next 999,000 to us aren't really that important. The first instance is important because that's usually what's been targeted at a certain organization. So once you understand that, when we start talking about some of the numbers, that's why some of the numbers seem a little bit smaller than what you'd expect. And when we start talking about worldwide numbers, we're talking about, millions or hundreds of millions of instances. We've actually seen billions of these files happening, but those are first seen, first instance, first response type of instances. And again, the information here was specifically provided to us from our internal threat group called Unit 42. And again, some of this information has been interpreted on my part. So again, that satisfies all my legal stuff that I needed to cover. So as long as everyone gives me a thumbs up, okay, we're good to go. So when I started with Palo Alto Networks about a year ago, my first question I had to myself really was, is Canada a target for like advanced persistent threats and nation states? Because we see all this stuff in the news, we hear all about this stuff, especially in the Middle East, where governments are attacking governments, US is doing some stuff maybe they should or shouldn't be doing, but really, is this affecting Canada? Or are we just kind of collateral damage to all the other stuff that's going on in the world. So that was the question I started trying to answer myself. And again, I've been working on this for a couple of months now. I've broken this down into very specific areas, again, specific threat actors that we know about and what their activity within Canada has been, as well as specific campaigns that we've seen happen over the past, again, 9 months from January 1st into September. So before that, I want to kind of get into what the threat landscape looks like worldwide versus Canada. So again, first new malware sample seen worldwide in that time frame was just over 130 million. We are seeing a lot of malware. Surprisingly, last month, and again, so this is data that's again not within this presentation, but starting in October, we saw a massive spike in Android, like probably 100 times increase in Android-related malware than we've ever seen before. Not quite sure why that happened all of a sudden, but the Android actors out there have gotten very, very active. So when we start talking about kind of the top file types that we see in the top campaigns, we're seeing a definite shift in the past kind of 4 to 5 weeks to more mobile devices away from what we've seen in the past, and that's very surprising to a lot of people in the industry. Within Canada, we saw, again, 135,000 new malware samples. So this isn't a small number. This is a lot of malware coming across Canada, and it is something that organizations are, and this is ramping up. So organizations are seeing higher and higher numbers of malware coming towards them, daily. So can we see this? This slide doesn't always translate very well. So this is basically just a breakdown on what we see worldwide versus within Canada. So top application worldwide is web browsing by far, right? So we see most malware being transferred through some type of web click, go to a site, download this. We've all hit that. If you're in IT, your users have done that, and that's usually the biggest pain that we see. What we're starting to see a little bit more of is if you kind of go all the way down to the second last one on the worldwide side is Google Cloud Storage. So we're starting to see a lot of these Google and Dropbox and that type of stuff being used for malware transmission, mostly because those are now considered to be, quote, business applications. And most organizations will never, ever, ever block something that's supposed to be part of the business. I'll talk about an example in a couple slides here where malware was using MSDN forums to transfer data back and forth. So it was uploading what looked like gobbledygook to a form, but another piece of malware was reading that form, taking it, encoding it, realizing what it was, and then sending its response back on the form. And again, from an IT's perspective, we look at that as probably an IT administrator going to MSDN forums and looking up information. Well, this was technically a transport mechanism for malware. So we're starting to see more and more and more of these type of Google storage cloud platforms. The presentation earlier on the video transport, that's super cool. We're seeing more and more of that type of stuff. The malware actors out there are really, really, really smart people, and they're really thinking outside of the box how to get around traditional mechanisms that enterprises have put in. On the Canada side, though, what's surprising is we're still seeing mostly email. Well, number one is email. I wouldn't say mostly email, but number one is still email. So if you look at SMT, POP3, IMAP, and I always laugh when I see POP3. I mean, who's using POP3 in the enterprise? This is a lot of people with iPhones or Android that have set up their home devices, and we're seeing that stuff transfer through. But if you look at the numbers, it's a substantial amount of malware still hitting that. And again, if you look all the way down, Google has hit this one as well. So we're seeing Google's, in this specific example is the cloud storage being actually a big mechanism to transfer malware, mostly down. This is, when you click on a link, we're pulling this stuff down from Google and then it's executing on our desktops. But this is really where we're starting to see a lot of organizations, kind of allowing stuff that they shouldn't be. And again, I chuckle, IT guy, right? FTP, really? Who allows FTP out and in still? Turns out a lot of people do because it's in the top 7 here on both sides. Now, the other thing that we look at here is the top industries. Now, high tech in the US is a little bit of an anomaly because there are organizations like ourselves, Checkpoint, Microsoft, Amazon. These are all considered to be high tech, right? So they're getting hit more than anyone else is because everyone's trying to, to disrupt. But if you look at wholesale and retail and education being kind of 2 and 3 within the worldwide target list versus Canada, insurance being number 1. I don't know if that's because we've got a very large, provider of insurance locally here in Winnipeg, or if that just happens to be what organizations are looking at, basically attacking. But you kind of go through and see education is up there as well, state and local government, all that type of stuff. So high tech in Canada, again, is quite low. Now, again, I don't know if this is because high tech in Canada is a very small subsector of our industries, right? Most high tech is in Silicon Valley. That's just the nature of where people get started. But if this is more of a targeted attack at high tech versus other industries. And again, so the other thing that I looked at here was where is the source of this malware coming from? So worldwide, surprisingly, despite all of the stuff you read in the media, US is number 1. The distribution of malware is coming from the US. And again, if you look at the slide, probably 5 or 6 times as much. France is number 2. I kind of thought that was funny. We always kind of think of France as waving the white flag. Well, they're pretty active in the. I shouldn't say that. That's probably on YouTube. Someone's going to put something here. But if you look at the Canada, landscape here as well, Canada is number 1 for attacking Canada. So again, we have a lot of enterprises that are blocking Russia, China, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, which is great, but it's a very small percentage of the malware that's actually hitting organizations. So again, US number 1, Netherlands being number 3, or US being number 2, Netherlands being number 3. And it's funny that France, even being kind of the second most active here, isn't even on the Canadian landscape, right? So you can kind of see where we fall into a very niche of, of what's going to call collateral damage from some of these much larger campaigns. So the next thing I did was I looked at the top actors. So these are individuals or individual groups that are actually attacking or providing malware around the world. So worldwide, we see some very, very large groups doing this stuff, and MakeSim is number 1 by far. Well, not by far, but number 1, and Gorgon Group is number 3. These are the only 2 active actors that we saw in Canada during that time. Now, again, remember, this is first instances only. I'm not saying that we didn't see anything from APT 33, but it wasn't a first instance. It wasn't a, let's call it a targeted attack to a Canadian organization. This is, very specific. So Gorgon Group, again, if we're going to go through a little bit about what these organizations do. Gorgon Group basically is responsible for a lot of the commercial malware we see out there today. They're using Loki, they're using a couple of the rat tools that are out there. Again, they're specifically looking at using Microsoft documents to provide a foothold in, and then using the Microsoft document as a secondary downloader or downloader. We're starting to see some very, very advanced things happening with Microsoft documents. So we actually saw one a couple of months ago that when you opened it, it was non-malicious, and it actually pulled information from your website. So not really a targeted attack, but it was actually pulling, based on the domain of the email, information from the website to populate the document. So you open this up, and you actually see a bunch of stuff from your website, and you kind of look at it, and you start reading it because it looks legit. As you scroll through, when you hit the 3rd page, the exploit kicked in. So not on page 1 or 2, on the 3rd page, the exploit kicked in. It actually compromised the system and downloaded a new payload. So when you're looking at things like that, the reason that happens is most next generation antivirus only looks at initial opening. It doesn't wait 30 or 40 or 50 seconds to see what happens. It says, open the file, what's going on in the file, nothing's going on in the file, I'm good to go. It doesn't wait to see if you scroll through. So we're starting to see more and more of that type of stuff happening in the industry. So Gorgon here specifically, basically what all they did here, and again, this is a very kind of simplistic version of malware. So there was a file, normal with normal .m, basically a template for Word documents. We saw them use this across, almost all of their attacks that we saw in Canada, up until May 21st. May 21st, they changed. So May 21st, we saw the first 3 instances of a file that was specifically called DHL, and it was something. It was either an account number or something, and they actually changed it to an RTF file. So instead of using a doc file, it's now an RTF file. So I dug in a little bit more. In that time frame between May 21st and June 3rd, we actually saw 13 other instances of this Gorgon Group RTF files. 12 of those files were absolutely just garbage in naming. They were, 16 to 32 characters long, mostly just, random generated. Very kind of, very easy to spot, very, kind of generic in the naming. One was called originalinvoice.doc. Okay, again, getting a little bit more creative. But when we looked at it, these 3 documents were created for their intended target. So Gorgon actually changed the way they did their distribution specifically for that one target. Changed their distribution method, so they've actually started using RTFs instead. Changed the naming scheme, it's not auto-generated, and actually changed the payload within those organizations. So in this case, again, I'm not a threat researcher, but in this case, this looks very, very highly like this organization targeted that one individual company for these new files. Now, the reason I say it looks like it is this could have also just been a new test of a new set of malware. It looks like it wasn't very successful because after June 3rd, we didn't see it again. So very specific, very short time frame, but then it wasn't actually carried out any further after these dates. All right, the next group that we saw here within Canada during this time frame was Makesim, right? This is number 1 in worldwide. Makesim is a Russian malware author specifically around Android. So very advanced Android malware looking specifically to steal SMSs. Again, I don't know why people want to steal SMSs. If you look at what I'm saying, it's usually running late, coming home, do you need milk? So I'm not quite sure why people are stealing this type of stuff, but sure. Yeah, okay. Again, very, very, generic type of malware, or very specific malware to Android. Is Makesim, targeting Canada? Probably not. We only saw 1 file in Canada in that whole time. Again, 1 net new file. There was almost 8,000 samples seen worldwide. For one file to make it to Canada, that was probably just a little bit of off spray, probably using an IP that they didn't realize. It really doesn't look like this was a target towards Canada at all. So, again, not that it's not important to know about, but we're not really being targeted by this specific. Sorry, someone's moving over here. I'm not sure if you show me signs or not. No, okay. This specific malware author. So, taking a look at the campaigns now. So those were specific actors. Now, campaigns are more of generic groups of activities targeted at the same end goal. So it could be, crypto mining, it could be, credential theft, all that type of stuff. So worldwide, again, we've seen some very specific ones. But again, within Canada, Silver Terrier is by far the highest that we've seen. And we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more. And a couple of crypto jackers here. And the Cody Crypto campaign one I think is interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that one as well. Again, I'm coming this from an enterprise side of things. Who's running Cody within their enterprise? Well, turns out people are, and they were targeted. So don't do that. Just in general, don't run Cody at work. Perfect. Okay, so Silver Terrier. So this is a Nigerian campaign. So the one thing that's interesting about this is these guys do not write their own malware. It is malware as a service mostly, and believe it or not, malware as a service is a huge, huge industry. It is off the shelf or off the dark web. This team is buying generic malware and basically brute forcing it. These are very, very effective campaigns because they are hitting hundreds of millions of people with it. So are they targeting Canada? No. They are targeting the world. They're, what they are trying to do is basically spray and pray as much as possible. They don't want to go after, very secure environments. They are really just hoping someone clicks on it and gets some information to get your bank account and steal some money from you. That is really all they're trying to do. This is one of the most effective campaigns that we have seen, just because of undereducated end users and the amount of volume that they are willing to put out. Second one here, this VBS cryptocurrency. We see cryptocurrency going through the roof, especially fileless cryptocurrency attacks. This is kind of the new haven, right? This is the new credential theft. If these organizations can get in and steal your compute resources to make money, they will. Now, the one thing that I think is hilarious about this is most times people that are clicking these links and getting crypto jacked already have other malware on their machine because they're not very educated, and their machine is slow as crap to begin with. So they're hitting dumb people with slow machines, which is a very, very low chance of them actually ever kind of making any money on doing it. So it is free compute, but for no apparent reason. So one of the school divisions here, and I won't name names, they actually allowed a few of these things to go through just to see how active they could actually get it. They didn't win a single, I'm sorry, I'm getting a brain fart. They didn't win anything, right? So they didn't make any money. They just basically ran cycles on laptops for no apparent reason. So again, I'm sure somewhere out there, organizations are making money at this, but this one definitely is really not. This one's another interesting one. So my little form book, it's basically a variant of the original form book. This is another one that was very interesting. So on 6/6/18, they had been using PDFs up until that point. They'd been using personal executables, so little exe files, that type of stuff up until that point. 6/6/18, they changed. Dead stop. Stopped using PEs almost 100%, started using Word files. First three also hit Canada. So very similar to what happened with the first one I talked about. First three files were now targeted specifically at Canada. Now, talking to the Unit 42 team about these files, it does not look like they were specific to the Canadian organization. It looks like they were testing a new delivery method. But after this point, almost 100% of their new malware distribution was through Word files. So obviously, or I guess not obviously, but one could assume that they were very successful and the PEs were not being very successful, so they've now moved their distribution methods through to Word files. So again, probably not a very specific targeted attack within Canada, but a test to test their new viability of a new payload and a new distribution method. So here, I love Cody Crypto campaign. So again, I don't want to ask how many people here have Cody boxes. Mine is really slow and old. If you were to load anything on here, you would not win anything. So again, there was only 72 samples seen worldwide. Again, this is an enterprise view of these type of malware. Again, who's running Cody at work? You probably shouldn't be, but okay. That's a whole different conversation to have. But again, only three were seen in Canada. So again, a very limited amount of Cody exploit going on within the world. But again, it's something that we do see a little bit of. I'm running out of time, so I want to talk specifically about this one. So Helsing. So Helsing is a group that actually targets other advanced threat actors. So it's kind of like the Dexter of cyber warfare. They only attack other people that are attacking countries. That's kind of neat. I think that's interesting. So they targeted the Neon group here, again, in the middle of the year. I don't believe that we have any Neon group members acting within Canada, so this is probably just kind of collateral damage from a much larger campaign that happened. Again, we don't know why it would have happened in Canada, but it is something that's kind of interesting to see that these groups now are starting to attack each other, and that's becoming the cyber warfare that's that we've heard about for so many years. So really the question that I started this was, is Canada a target? Overall, I would say no. We aren't really specified target for most of these campaigns. We've seen a little bit of stuff being targeted within Canada, but it doesn't necessarily, we don't really see a lot of very specific targeted attacks to Canada. So this should, if you're a security professional, change the way you think a little bit about how you're protecting your networks, right? We're not necessarily worrying about those net new 0 days. These things have been seen elsewhere in the world. So start looking at using other mechanisms to pull information into your organization, where you don't have to necessarily be the first person to prevent it, but you want to make sure that you're actually taking advantage of a lot of these, these free shared spam house lists and all that type of stuff to make sure that you're actually utilizing other people's misfortune to protect yourself. I've been told time's up, so if anyone has any questions, please grab me. I'll stick around during lunch. If you have any questions, please grab me, and I think lunch is going to be served right away. So thank you.